Jar Jar Binks entered the galaxy as comic relief. He stumbled, tripped, and spoke in a way that made many laugh or cringe. On the surface, he looked harmless, almost too harmless for the dangerous times he lived in. But what if that clumsiness was a mask? What if his foolishness was the perfect cover to hide something far more sinister? Many fans have explored the idea that Jar Jar Binks was not just a lucky Gungan from Naboo, but a Sith Lord who helped change the galaxy forever. When we look at his actions, the theory starts to gain ground. During the events of The Phantom Menace, Jar Jar manages to survive battles that should have ended him. While others fall, he always finds a way through chaos. It could be luck, but the odds don't add up. For example, in the battle with the droid army, he drops a boomer and destroys tanks. He falls from vehicles and yet lands in ways that help his side win. These accidents look random, but what if they were guided by the Force? Sith often use deception and misdirection. Pretending to be clumsy would be the perfect cover to mask his control of the battlefield. His greatest moment of influence comes later. In Attack of the Clones, Jar Jar is the one who gives emergency powers to Chancellor Palpatine. That single act allows Palpatine to create the Grand Army of the Republic, which becomes the backbone of the Empire. How could someone so clumsy be trusted with such authority? It is easy to think that the Senate overlooked him, but perhaps the Senate was manipulated. Jar Jar may have used Sith persuasion, much like a Jedi uses the Force for mind tricks. This moment is not a small accident. It is a turning point for the galaxy. If Palpatine needed a pawn to push his plan forward, Jar Jar was the perfect choice. But what if he wasn't a pawn at all? What if he was a willing partner in the grand design? The idea becomes more interesting when you think of the Sith rule of two. There is always a master and an apprentice. We know Palpatine had Darth Maul at first. After Maul's fall, he turned to Count Dooku. But between those shifts in power, could Jar Jar have been in the mix? If he was skilled at hiding his true nature, Palpatine may have valued him as more than a fool. Imagine the two of them working together in secret. Palpatine in the shadows and Jar Jar acting the perfect distraction in the open. A Sith apprentice that nobody would suspect could walk into any chamber, listen to secrets, and manipulate leaders without question. The Gungan's strange speech and movements could even be part of a deeper technique. In martial arts and combat, unpredictability is a weapon. Enemies underestimate the fighter who looks awkward. They misjudge timing and intent. Jar Jar may have used the same method, making everyone dismiss him while he acted with precision under the surface. His wide, clumsy gestures could mask hand movements channeling the Force. His high, silly voice could distract from subtle manipulations of those around him. Think of the way Yoda uses his size to mislead enemies. He appears small and frail, only to explode into motion with a lightsaber. Now apply that idea to Jar Jar. Instead of showing strength, he shows weakness. Instead of wisdom, he shows ignorance. But underneath, he might have been moving pieces on the galactic board. Even the Jedi Council, known for their insight, seemed blind to him. They dismissed him as comic relief in politics and war. Yet the Sith were always close by, and their survival depended on staying hidden in plain sight. What better camouflage than a clumsy outcast who nobody respected? Jar Jar fit that role perfectly, which is exactly why some fans believe he was not only part of Palpatine's rise, but perhaps even the true apprentice shaping events from the shadows. When Emperor Palpatine died on the second Death Star, many believed the Sith threat ended with him. Darth Vader sacrificed himself to destroy his master and bring balance to the Force. Yet questions remain about what truly happened to Palpatine after his body was destroyed. Sith were never known to vanish quietly. Their obsession with power and control went beyond the physical world. If Jedi could live on as Force ghosts, Then what stopped Palpatine from finding his own path to linger after death? His mastery of the dark side suggests his spirit may still move within the galaxy, shaping events long after his fall. The Sith studied immortality differently than the Jedi. While Jedi like Obi-Wan and Yoda became guides through the Force, Sith sought to cling to existence by any means. They refused to let go of power. Ancient texts tell of Sith who tried to anchor themselves to objects, places, or even other beings. Palpatine studied these methods for decades. He had knowledge of Darth Plagueis, who was said to manipulate life and death. Palpatine himself hinted at powers many feared to explore. It would not be out of reach for him to extend his will beyond death, tied to the Force through corruption and control, rather than peace. Imagine standing on Endor years after the battle. The wreckage of the Death Star remains. The air feels heavy, and the ground seems touched by something unnatural. Soldiers and scavengers might pass through and sense dread without knowing why. That could be Palpatine's spirit lingering, not in the form of a ghostly guide like a Jedi, but as a shadow pressing against the living. His presence would not bring calm. It would whisper fear, anger, and doubt. This is how the dark side lingers, not to uplift, but to bend others toward weakness. There are hints across the stories that Palpatine's will survived. In later years, remnants of the Empire spoke of following his plan as if his voice still directed them. Some cults treated him as more than a fallen leader, believing he still spoke through the Force. Even Snoke, who served as a puppet for Palpatine, may have been part of this continuation. The idea that his spirit could manipulate the living makes sense when we see how he influenced the creation of clones and experiments that carried pieces of his essence. Unlike Jedi spirits, Palpatine's lingering would not appear as a glowing figure with wisdom to share. Instead, it would be felt as pressure on the galaxy, an unseen hand that refuses to release its grip. Where Jedi spirits reassure, his would unsettle. Where Jedi spirits guide, his would corrupt. He would not let the galaxy forget him, even without a body. Anakin Skywalker's story begins in mystery. He had no father, only a mother who claimed that he was conceived by the will of the Force. This claim has always stood at the center of his destiny. The Jedi believed he was the chosen one, meant to bring balance to the Force. Yet what balance means has never been clear. Some saw it as the destruction of the Sith. Others understood it as something deeper, a union of both light and dark, carried within one person. Anakin's very existence raises the question of whether the Force itself created him to correct an imbalance that had grown over centuries. The Jedi Order had grown powerful, but also rigid. They saw the Force as something to be used only in discipline and detachment. They rejected emotion, fear, and attachment. In doing so, they ignored parts of life that the dark side embraced. The Sith, on the other hand, devoted themselves to those very things: passion, anger, and the hunger for control. The galaxy swung between these two extremes. The Force may have responded by creating someone who embodied both, someone who could bridge what the Jedi refused to accept and what the Sith corrupted. That someone was Anakin. His life shows this dual nature. As a boy, he displayed unmatched skill in pod racing, feats that relied on instinct and control of the Force. He was fearless, compassionate toward his mother and friends, yet quick to anger when faced with injustice. In one moment he rescued others, and in the next he gave in to destructive rage. He loved deeply, but that love also led to fear of loss. These were not flaws alone. They were signs that he held both light and dark within him, in ways that neither Jedi nor Sith could manage. Consider his fall to Darth Vader. It seems like a failure of destiny, but it can also be seen as part of the balance. Through his eventual redemption, the Sith were destroyed. Neither side could exist without the other. His creation by the Force may have been designed to play out exactly that cycle, first to let the darkness rise, and then to cut it down through his final act of sacrifice. The prophecy called him the Chosen One, but perhaps it was less about victory for one side and more about restoring the natural state of the Force. Balance does not mean only light. Balance means light and dark held together, neither destroyed, neither unchecked. Anakin's life, from slave to Jedi, from Sith to redeemed father, reflects that truth. He was made by the Force to carry both sides, not to deny one and cling to the other. When Luke Skywalker built his green lightsaber, he had just faced one of the lowest points in his journey. He had lost his father's blue blade in the duel with Darth Vader on Cloud City. Without it, he was vulnerable, and he needed to forge his own weapon before facing the dangers ahead. Many fans wonder how he found the parts, especially the crystal that powered the saber. One theory suggests that the crystal came not from Luke's own discovery, but from a stash Obi-Wan Kenobi had kept hidden for years. Obi-Wan lived in exile on Tatooine for nearly 2 decades. During that time, he stayed quiet, but he never stopped preparing. He knew the fight against the Sith was not finished. A Jedi without a lightsaber was incomplete, and he may have thought ahead to the day when Luke would need one. It would make sense for him to keep extra kyber crystals hidden, in case they were ever required. Tatooine was remote, but Obi-Wan had been a Jedi general. He had access to knowledge and resources before the fall of the Republic. Smuggling a few crystals to his home in exile would not have been impossible. When Luke set out to build his new weapon, he was still learning what it meant to be a Jedi. He had trained with Yoda, but his time was short. Constructing a lightsaber is a trial in itself. A Jedi must find a crystal, connect with it through the Force, and bind the weapon together. But kyber crystals were nearly gone from the galaxy by that point. The Empire had stripped them from worlds like Ilum to build the Death Star. Luke had no access to those sources, yet he managed to complete his saber in time for the rescue of Han Solo. The most likely answer is that he used something already left behind for him. Imagine Obi-Wan's hut on Tatooine, filled with relics and tools from his past life. Among the journals and old robes, there could have been a case with a handful of crystals, preserved for the right moment. Luke, guided by Obi-Wan's spirit, or by simple searching, could have discovered it after his training on Dagobah. Using one of those crystals, he would have completed the weapon in secret before confronting Jabba the Hutt. The weapon itself, with its green blade, symbolized Luke's growth. It was not simply a replacement for his father's sword. It was a new identity, forged from knowledge left by Obi-Wan and shaped by Luke's own will. Rey and Kylo Ren shared a bond that went beyond anything the Jedi had experienced before. They were not teacher and student, not allies, and not true enemies. Their link was created through the Force itself, something neither of them fully understood at first. While Jedi in the past had shared connections with their masters or battle partners, the bond between Rey and Kylo was different. It was raw, immediate, and unbroken by distance. They could see each other, hear each other, and even touch each other through this strange link, no matter where in the galaxy they were. This connection first appeared after Rey discovered her own power and Kylo sensed her rising strength. It was not a bond they chose, yet it grew stronger each time they encountered one another. Unlike Jedi pairs of the past, they did not train side by side or build trust slowly. Their bond cut through space in an instant. When Rey stood on Arch, Tu and Kylo sat aboard a Star Destroyer. They were still face to face. The Force carried their thoughts and emotions across impossible distances. It allowed them to speak as if they were in the same room. And more than once, it brought them close enough to exchange blows without being physically present. The Jedi spoke often about the dangers of attachment. A master could sense a student's fear, a twin might feel when the other was in danger, and a bond between soldiers could grow over years of fighting together. But none of those links carried the weight of Rey and Kylo's connection. Their bond was immediate and unbreakable, even when they tried to resist it. They could not hide from one another. If Kylo was in pain, Rey felt it. If Rey reached for strength, Kylo sensed it. The Force tied them together in ways that went beyond knowledge or training. An example of its strength appears in their duel over the wreckage of the second Death Star. Though they fought with weapons, their bond was the real battlefield. Rey struck in anger, and Kylo pushed back with calm resolve. Every movement of the fight carried not only skill, but also the pull of their link. When Leia reached out through the Force to her son, Rey felt the opening instantly and struck him down. In that moment, the bond showed its true depth. They did not only fight each other, they fought themselves, reflected in the other's struggle. Later, this bond became the reason for victory over Palpatine. Rey stood against the Sith, but she did not stand alone. Kylo, redeemed as Ben Solo, reached her not only in person, but through their shared essence. When he gave his life to save hers, it was the ultimate act made possible by their connection. No Jedi before had experienced a bond that carried such weight. Master and apprentice ties were strong, but they relied on hierarchy. The dyad between Rey and Kylo was equal. The Force gave them balance in opposite forms: light and dark, hope and despair, life and death. The Jedi would have called it dangerous. The Sith would have called it powerful. But for Rey and Kylo, it was simply unavoidable. They were drawn together by the Force itself, their bond stronger than any before them, a connection that shaped not just their lives, but the fate of the galaxy. Yoda was the most powerful Jedi of his age, a master who lived for centuries and studied the Force in ways few could understand. He sat at the head of the Jedi Council and carried the weight of tradition, history, and responsibility. When the Sith returned, the galaxy believed their rise came as a surprise. Yet there are reasons to think Yoda knew more than he admitted. The silence he kept may not have been ignorance. It may have been a choice to let destiny unfold, even if it brought pain. The Jedi believed the Sith were gone for 1,000 years. They taught that the Order of the Sith had been destroyed, leaving only whispers and rumors. But Yoda was no ordinary Jedi. His connection to the Force was stronger than any of his peers, and he spent years meditating on the flow of destiny. It is unlikely that he failed to sense the shadow building across the galaxy. The dark side had begun to cloud the Force, making visions uncertain and futures harder to see. But Yoda himself admitted that the dark side was growing, long before the Council accepted it. He spoke of uncertainty with calm, yet his words hinted that he knew the Sith had not been erased, only hidden. Why would he remain quiet? The answer may lie in Yoda's understanding of destiny. He knew the Force worked in cycles. Light and dark rose and fell, and balance was never permanent. If he revealed too much, the Council might have acted out of fear. They could have launched hunts, arrested leaders, or even struck down innocents in desperation to find an enemy they barely understood. That kind of reaction would have played directly into the Sith's strength. Yoda may have decided that silence would prevent the Jedi from tearing themselves apart too early. Consider the case of Anakin Skywalker. Yoda knew the boy was dangerous to train, yet he allowed it. He sensed fear and attachment, but he still chose to let the prophecy run its course. In the same way, Yoda may have sensed the return of the Sith, but accepted it as part of the balance the Force demanded. By allowing events to unfold, he gave space for the chosen one to fulfill his role, even if it meant great loss along the way. Examples from Yoda's actions support this view. During the fall of the Republic, he often gave advice in riddles. he never revealed everything he saw in meditation. When faced with Count Dooku, a Sith who had once been his student, Yoda did not show surprise. He fought with skill, but carried himself with the calm of someone who already expected such a confrontation. Later, when Palpatine revealed himself as Darth Sidious, Yoda admitted that the Jedi had been blind, but his tone was not shocked. It was steady, almost as if he had long prepared for this moment. Silence is not always ignorance. For Yoda, it was strategy. He trusted the Force more than he trusted action. By holding back, by letting destiny play out, he allowed the galaxy to reach the point where true balance could be restored. His wisdom was not in preventing the Sith's return, but in knowing when to step aside and let the Force guide events, no matter how painful they became. Boba Fett's fall into the Sarlacc pit on Tatooine looked like the end of the feared bounty hunter. The creature was said to digest its victims over 1,000 years, and even the strongest warriors would have no hope of escape once swallowed, yet Boba Fett did not die. His Mandalorian armor was more than a suit of plates. It was a walking survival system, built with hidden technology that gave him the chance to endure what should have been certain death. Mandalorian armor was designed for more than battle. Each piece was crafted with layers of functions that made the wearer nearly impossible to kill. Fett's helmet contained a sealed air filtration system. That alone bought him time inside the Sarlacc, where the air would have been toxic and full of corrosive gases. The armor's plating, forged from Beskar alloy, resisted the stomach acid that would have eaten through flesh and weaker metals. To the Sarlacc, Fett was not a helpless prisoner. He was a problem lodged in its gut. But defense alone was not enough. Survival required active measures. Fett's gauntlets carried tools beyond weapons. A flamethrower, small rockets, and cutting devices gave him ways to fight even when buried alive. Imagine the scene, inside darkness, pressed by walls of muscle, the air hot and foul. Fett uses his wrist flamethrower, scorching the creature from within. Pain ripples through its body, causing it to convulse and loosen its grip. With each burst of fire or explosion from his mini-rockets, Fett carved out the space he needed to move. The armor also carried systems designed to keep him alive in extreme environments. A built-in oxygen reserve could sustain him long enough to fight. A nutrient pack in the suit could supply energy while he struggled to break free. His jetpack, damaged in the fall, may have sparked or ignited during the fight. Adding to the chaos inside the Sarlacc, the very equipment that caused his accident at the pit's edge may have been the same gear that gave him the final push to escape. What makes this survival even more believable is Fett's training. He was not a soldier who relied only on brute strength. He was raised with the skills of Mandalorian culture and sharpened through years of bounty hunting. He knew how to use every part of his armor in creative ways. For him, the hidden tech was not just gear. It was an extension of his body, where another victim would panic. Fett used calculation and patience. He listened for weakness, applied his weapons with purpose, and turned the Sarlacc's body into his battleground. By the time he clawed his way out of the sand, he was scarred, exhausted, and changed. But he was alive. His survival did not depend on luck. It was the result of Mandalorian armor built with foresight, hidden systems meant for impossible scenarios, and the will of a fighter who refused to die. The Sarlacc was supposed to be the ultimate prison, yet Boba Fett carried the tools of escape on his body the entire time. When Anakin Skywalker fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader, his body was already broken. The duel on Mustafar left him burned, mutilated, and unable to live without machines. Palpatine saved his life, but the suit that kept him alive was not designed for comfort. It was designed to control him. Every part of Vader's armor and breathing system ensured survival, but it also ensured pain. His master wanted him strong in the dark side, and pain was the fuel that kept him there. The suit worked as a prison. The black armor covered him from head to toe, sealing him inside an environment that was hostile even as it kept him alive. The respirator made his breathing mechanical and loud. It forced him to draw each breath with effort, a reminder that his life was no longer his own. The helmet's lenses limited his vision, giving him a narrow field compared to natural sight. The gloves and boots dulled his sense of touch. The constant hum of machinery in his chest left him aware of his dependence every second. The medical design was crude compared to what the Empire could have offered. Palpatine had access to advanced technology, yet he chose to give Vader outdated cybernetics. The limbs were heavy and slow, making Vader powerful but less agile. They lacked the precision of the body he once had. His burned flesh never fully healed. The lining of the suit pressed against scar tissue, causing irritation and raw pain every time he moved. Instead of soothing his condition, the suit amplified his suffering. Palpatine understood the nature of the dark side. Sith drew strength from anger, fear, and pain. By locking Vader in a shell that tormented him, he ensured that his apprentice never left that state. Every breath reminded Vader of what he lost. Every step in heavy boots reminded him of his failure. Even sleep offered no escape, since the suit prevented him from resting naturally. To remove it for long periods meant death. The only relief he ever had came through meditation or immersion in healing tanks. But those moments were brief and temporary. Imagine what this meant in combat. As Vader faced enemies, his pain sharpened his focus. Strikes fueled by rage carried more force. His opponents heard the mechanical breathing, saw the towering armor, and underestimated how much of that power came not from the suit, but from his constant suffering. What weakened him physically strengthened him through the dark side. He turned his torment into a weapon, projecting fear as much as strength. The suit also cut him off from humanity. He could no longer eat or drink in the normal sense. His voice came filtered through a synthesizer, deep and unnatural. To anyone around him, he was less a man and more a machine. That isolation deepened his anger. He could not be touched, comforted, or seen as he once was. He became trapped in the image of Darth Vader, never allowed to step back into the life of Anakin Skywalker. All of this was by design. The armor kept him alive, but it also kept him chained. It was not a gift from his master. It was a cage built to break him down and force him to draw power from endless pain. Leia Organa was known across the galaxy as a leader, a diplomat, and a fighter. She stood at the center of the rebellion, commanding respect with her courage and sharp mind. What few realized was that she carried the same Force potential as her twin brother Luke. Some even argue that her natural connection to the Force was stronger than his, but she chose not to walk the path of the Jedi. She hid her strength, using it quietly while focusing on politics and leadership. From the moment of their birth, both Leia and Luke were tied to the Force. They were the children of Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, and they inherited his power. But their lives took different paths. Luke was raised as a farm boy, unaware of his heritage, and when he discovered the Force, he embraced it fully. Leia, raised as royalty on Alderaan, already had discipline, responsibility, and influence. She used the Force not by wielding a lightsaber, but by guiding others, sensing truth in conversations, and staying unshaken in moments of crisis. Where Luke struggled to learn control, Leia seemed to have it naturally. There are moments in her life that reveal this hidden strength. On the Death Star, when Luke and Han rushed to rescue her, Leia took control of the situation herself. Her instincts guided her through danger with precision. Later, after Alderaan's destruction, she endured a loss that would have broken most people. While Luke openly mourned, Leia stood steady. That resilience may not have been only her willpower, but also the Force strengthening her. Her ability to resist fear and despair gave her allies confidence. Even when hope was fading, the bond between Luke and Leia also points to her strength. She sensed his presence on Cloud City when he was near death after the duel with Vader. Without training, she heard his call through the Force, something most Jedi could not achieve without years of discipline. She guided the Falcon to rescue him, acting on an intuition that proved stronger than logic. This was not a small act. It was a direct sign of her raw power. Luke himself later admitted that Leia could have been the one to rebuild the Jedi. He trained her for a time, and she built her own lightsaber. She excelled in combat and control, but she chose to stop, seeing visions of her son's future and fearing the path her training might take. This decision did not mean weakness. It showed wisdom. Leia understood that her role in the galaxy was not to wield the Force like a weapon, but to shape its destiny through leadership. She used her strength in ways the Jedi often overlooked: quiet influence, trust in her instincts, and the ability to inspire people to follow her even into impossible battles. Imagine if Leia had chosen to take the Jedi path fully. With her discipline, clarity, and innate strength, she could have surpassed Luke in mastery. Yet she knew her purpose was different. She concealed the full extent of her power, letting the galaxy see her as a leader first. By hiding it, she ensured that her destiny would not be defined by the same burdens that crushed her father and haunted her brother. The Millennium Falcon was always more than a ship. It earned a reputation as the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy, able to outrun Imperial fleets and survive fights no other freighter could. But part of what made the Falcon so unique was not just its design or the skill of its pilots. Over decades of modifications, repairs, and crashes, the ship became something greater. With multiple droid brains wired into its systems and layers of unusual upgrades, the Falcon developed traits that felt close to sentience. It responded in ways that suggested it had a will of its own, almost like it chose to fight, flee, or endure alongside its crew. The Falcon began life as a Corellian YT-1300 freighter, a common model built for cargo runs. Han Solo and Chewbacca took the ship and pushed it beyond its original limits. Every major system was replaced, rewired, or enhanced. The hyperdrive was notoriously unstable yet unmatched in speed. Weapon systems were custom, fitted, far heavier than a civilian freighter should carry. More important were the computer cores. Instead of a single navigational computer, the Falcon carried multiple droid brains networked into its systems. One of them came from a highly advanced droid that specialized in navigation and star charts. Another carried combat routines. These artificial minds were fused together to run the ship, and over years of interaction, they began to develop quirks. This explains why the Falcon often behaved as though it had a personality. Han cursed at it like it was stubborn. Lando treated it with pride, as if it were a partner. Even Rey later noted how quickly the Falcon seemed to respond to her, as though the ship recognized her instincts. For example, during the escape from Tatooine in A New Hope, the Falcon's shields held just long enough for Han to make the jump to hyperspace. During the escape from Hoth, the ship resisted damage, even when Imperial forces pressed hard. While this could be explained by strong engineering, it also seemed that the Falcon had a sense of timing, enduring just enough for its pilots to do the impossible. Imagine a ship with overlapping layers of droid logic running through its circuits. Over decades, those systems would blend, share memory, and create responses not written into any manual. The Falcon may have learned from every pilot who touched its controls. When Han pushed the hyperdrive to its limit, the ship adapted. When Lando flew it into tight battles, it remembered how to maneuver under fire. When Rey sat in the cockpit, The ship seemed to recognize her touch as familiar, guiding her through moves she had never practiced. This was not ordinary technology. It was something closer to instinct built into circuits. The idea of a partially sentient falcon also explains why the ship so often defied the odds. It was not just a machine responding to commands. It was a partner. It wanted to survive, to win, and to carry its crew through battles that should have been fatal. The upgrades gave it more than speed and firepower. They gave it a mind, one that grew with time and experience, until the Falcon was no longer just a freighter, but a legend with a will of its own. Darth Plagueis was spoken of in whispers, remembered only through the tale Palpatine told Anakin Skywalker. The story described a Sith Lord so powerful he could manipulate life and death itself. But who was betrayed by his apprentice? To most, that story ended there. Yet if Plagueis truly mastered the power to prevent death, then his supposed murder may not have been the end. Instead of vanishing, he may have hidden, working through the shadows while his apprentice believed he had claimed full control. The Sith were obsessed with survival. Unlike the Jedi, who accepted becoming one with the Force, the Sith clung to existence. Their fear of death fueled experiments that went far beyond natural limits. Ancient Sith learned to bind their spirits to objects, tombs, and even worlds steeped in the dark side. Plague was a master of midichlorian manipulation, able to create and sustain life. If he achieved even part of what Palpatine described, then it is possible he extended his own consciousness beyond the reach of a blade. Palpatine may have thought he struck down his master, but Plagueis could have lingered, not as a ghost in the Jedi sense, but as a hidden will moving through the galaxy. If this is true, then his influence may explain many of the strange threads that wove through galactic history after his supposed death. The rise of the Empire was credited to Palpatine's genius, yet perhaps Plagueis still whispered in the background. A master who could manipulate midichlorians might not need a throne. He could bend events by touching bloodlines, creating new Force-sensitive beings, or corrupting whole generations. Some even suggest that Anakin Skywalker himself was the result of Plagueis' experiments with the Force. If that is true, then his hand was already shaping destiny, long before Palpatine revealed himself. Imagine Plagueis existing as a shadow, not tied to one body, but dispersed across the Force in places of darkness. Sith cults on Exegol, hidden laboratories, and even fragments of Palpatine's cloning work could have carried his will forward. The galaxy may have thought it was facing one emperor, when in truth it faced two Sith working in different ways, one ruling openly and the other pulling strings from deeper shadows. Palpatine's own obsession with immortality could have been planted by Plagueis, a seed he allowed to grow so that his apprentice would build the very systems that made survival possible for them both. Examples of lingering influence can be imagined in the way the Sith kept returning. Even after Palpatine's fall, remnants of his power continued to operate with purpose. Armies were built in secret, fleets assembled far from the Republic's reach, and dark side followers carried out plans that seemed too vast for one man to design. Plagueis, never truly dead, could have been the architect ensuring that the Sith legacy stretched beyond any single master. His survival would explain how the galaxy continued to spiral back toward conflict, as if one guiding hand refused to release it from the cycle of dark and light. When Obi-Wan Kenobi faced Darth Vader aboard the Death Star, he knew the fight was not about winning. He had trained Luke, warned him of the dangers ahead, and guided him toward his destiny. By the time their sabers clashed, Obi-Wan had already chosen his path. He let Vader strike him down, not out of defeat, but as a way to merge with the Force in a form that would allow him to continue guiding Luke beyond death. The duel itself shows this choice clearly. Vader pressed forward with power, his strikes heavy and mechanical. Obi-Wan defended with calm precision, He did not look for an opening to kill Vader. He did not use the aggressive style he once wielded in the Clone Wars. His movements were measured almost as if he was delaying the moment, rather than trying to change the outcome. When he saw Luke watching from the hangar, he lowered his saber and accepted the final blow. To many, it looked like surrender. To Obi-Wan, it was the moment he became more powerful than his former apprentice could imagine. This decision came from knowledge gained years earlier. Obi-Wan learned from Qui-Gon Jinn, who discovered how to live on after death. While Qui-Gon never fully mastered the ability to appear in physical form, his research laid the foundation for Jedi like Obi-Wan and Yoda to continue their presence after death. Obi-Wan understood that death was not an end but a transition. By letting Vader strike him down, he was not destroyed. He became one with the Force, free from the limits of flesh, and able to reach Luke whenever needed. Consider the alternatives. If Obi-Wan had fought to win, he would have had to kill Vader. Even if he succeeded, Luke might have been left with nothing but anger and confusion, watching his master slay his own father. That would have risked Luke's fall before his journey truly began. If Obi-Wan had chosen to escape, he might have lived, but the Death Star would still stand, and Luke would still lack the push needed to grow on his own. By offering his life in that moment, Obi-Wan gave Luke both protection and purpose. His death shocked Luke into realizing the stakes of the war, while his voice carried on to guide him toward Yoda and further training. The choice also mattered for Vader. In striking down his old master, he believed he had gained victory. But what he truly did was open the door for Obi-Wan to live on beyond him. The Sith relied on power bound to the physical world, clinging to their bodies and possessions. The Jedi found strength in letting go, and Obi-Wan's calm acceptance of death was a lesson to both Vader and Luke. It showed the difference between control through fear and strength through trust in the Force. Obi-Wan's merging with the Force was not a desperate act, but the final step in a plan. He sacrificed his body so that his spirit could remain. He allowed Vader's strike because he knew the fight could only be won in the long path ahead, and he would walk that path with Luke from beyond the veil of death. A lightsaber is more than a weapon to the Jedi. It is a living bond between themselves and the Force. The common belief is that Jedi forge their own sabers, building them piece by piece as a sign of discipline and growth. But the truth runs deeper. The crystal at the heart of the blade is not just a tool, it carries a will of its own. And in the moment of connection, it chooses the Jedi as much as the Jedi chooses it. The process begins when younglings are taken to find their kyber crystals. They do not simply pick one off a shelf. They travel to places like the caves on Ilum, where crystals resonate with the Force. Each child steps into the dark, uncertain of what they will find. The crystals glow in response to the ones who are meant to wield them. This is not random. The Force guides the crystal to its Jedi, revealing itself only when the connection is right. In some cases, the Jedi struggles until they surrender to trust. Only then does the crystal call to them. It is not a matter of willpower, but of harmony. This bond explains why each lightsaber feels unique. Obi-Wan's blue blade carried the calm focus of his disciplined style. Yoda's shorter saber reflected his size, but also his unmatched agility. Luke's green blade, built after he lost his father's, marked a turning point in his journey, as though the crystal itself revealed his new path. Rey's yellow blade, ignited at the end of her story, showed her place as someone who carried both Jedi and something beyond them. These colors and forms were not chosen by chance. They were the result of the crystal revealing what was already within. The Sith twist this process. They cannot find harmony with crystals, so they take them by force. A kyber crystal resists corruption, and when a Sith bends it to their will, the crystal bleeds, turning red. This is why Sith blades carry that distinctive color. It is not just dye or technology. It is proof that the crystal itself resisted until it was broken. That act alone shows the crystal has choice, and when bonded with a Jedi, it does so willingly. Imagine a Jedi stepping into the cave, surrounded by thousands of crystals. None respond except one, glowing faintly, calling through the Force. That crystal is not picked out for beauty or size. It reveals itself because the Jedi and crystal are aligned. Once joined, the Jedi feels its energy as part of their own. In battle, the blade moves as if it is an extension of thought, not because of training alone, but because the bond is alive. This bond also explains why sabers carry a kind of memory. When Luke first touched Anakin's saber in Maz Kanata's castle, visions flooded him. The weapon had carried history, and through the Force, it passed fragments of that story. It was not just metal and crystal. It was a partner that remembered lightsabers. In this way, are not lifeless tools. They are companions chosen by the Force, waiting for the right Jedi to reveal their power. The Jedi build them, but the crystal makes the final choice, binding itself to the one it deems worthy. Kylo Ren's helmet was more than a mask. It was forged to inspire fear and to connect him with the legacy of the Sith he admired. Modelled after Darth Vader's armor, it carried a weight far beyond appearance. The helmet was tied to Sith artifacts and dark side energy, and through it, Kylo heard whispers that guided and haunted him. To him, these voices felt like direction from the past, the echo of power that refused to die. The Sith had long used objects to channel their will. Ancient holocrons stored knowledge, but some relics carried fragments of consciousness, almost like prisons for dark spirits. Masks, weapons, and even entire temples were steeped in the dark side. A helmet worn by someone devoted to the Sith would not only serve as armor, but as a link to these currents. Kylo's obsession with Darth Vader's remains made him vulnerable to these whispers. He kept Vader's scorched helmet as a relic, speaking to it as if it could answer. This act of devotion created the space for the dark side to press into him through artifacts tied to that same energy. His own helmet became another channel for that influence. When Kylo wore the mask, his voice deepened and distorted, not only through electronics, but through the presence of the dark side itself. He became more brutal, less conflicted. The whispers encouraged him to strike harder, to doubt mercy, and to sever every tie to the light that remained in him. To Kylo, this was strength. He believed the voices were the guidance of Vader himself, pushing him to complete what his grandfather started. In reality, they may have been echoes of the Sith, using the artifact to shape his choices. Consider his moments of doubt. Without the helmet, Kylo often faltered. He questioned his path and felt the pull of the light through his family. But when he placed the mask on his face, his resolve hardened. It was not just about hiding his fear. The whispers drowned out his conflict, filling the silence with command. Imagine the weight of hearing a voice in your mind that tells you your destiny is clear, that every doubt is weakness, and that the only way forward is through destruction. For someone like Kylo, already torn between two legacies, those whispers were enough to tip the balance. The helmet itself became a symbol of his bond to the dark side. When Snoke mocked him for relying on it, Kylo smashed it in anger. Yet later, he reforged it, binding the broken pieces with glowing lines. This act showed more than stubbornness. It was a ritual, almost like reforging his connection to the whispers. Each fracture sealed with crimson energy made the mask stronger, more tied to the darkness that had first spoken through it. By wearing it again, he embraced the artifact not just as armor, but as a channel to the voices that had shaped him since the beginning of his fall. Through Sith artifacts, Kylo's helmet was never only metal and glass. It was a vessel of the past, whispering reminders of his chosen path. keeping him locked in the struggle between what he thought was destiny and what the dark side demanded of him. Mace Windu's duel with Palpatine ended in betrayal. He fought with unmatched skill, disarmed the Sith Lord, and prepared to strike him down. At that moment, Anakin Skywalker intervened, severing his hand. Palpatine unleashed a torrent of Force lightning that hurled Windu through the shattered window of the Chancellor's office. To the galaxy, this was his death. Few could survive such a fall in the heart of Coruscant. But Mace Windu was no ordinary Jedi. His mastery of the Force and his will to endure could have saved him, allowing him to live in hiding while the galaxy descended into the grip of the Empire. Windu was one of the most powerful Jedi of his era. He had developed Vapad, a lightsaber form that turned an enemy's dark side energy back against them. Few could match him in combat, and his connection to the Force was deep enough to give him visions of the future. It is not unreasonable to believe he used that strength to survive. As he fell, broken and burned, the Force could have slowed his descent. Jedi had leapt from great heights before, using the Force to absorb impact or guide their landings. Windu's injuries were severe, but survival was possible. Once on the ground, he would have faced another challenge. His hand was gone, his body weakened, and his face scarred by lightning. To remain alive, he had to vanish. The fall of the Jedi Order was already underway. Clones across the galaxy executed Order 66. Palpatine declared the Jedi traitors. For Windu to rise again would have been suicide. Instead, he likely slipped into the underworld of Coruscant, where thousands lived in the shadows, far from the eyes of the Empire. With his hood drawn and his power concealed, he could disappear among those who never cared about the fall of the Jedi. Life in hiding would not have been easy for someone like Windu. He was a leader, a master who once guided the Council with authority. But stripped of that role, he may have embraced survival as his only path. Perhaps he trained in secret, using his one good hand with modified weapons. Perhaps he meditated on his failure, wrestling with guilt over the fall of the Jedi and the rise of the Sith. Every whisper of Vader's hunts would remind him of what had been lost, yet silence would be his shield. There are stories in the galaxy of old warriors appearing at the right moment. Imagine a small settlement on a distant world threatened by mercenaries. A cloaked man steps forward, wielding a weapon with deadly precision. He leaves before anyone can ask his name. That could have been Windu, intervening without revealing himself. A survivor who once stood at the peak of the Jedi, reduced to a ghost who fought only when he could no longer look away. The possibility of his survival adds weight to his legend. Mace Windu's fall was dramatic, but the Force had carried Jedi through worse. His survival would not mean triumph. It would mean a long, hidden existence, watching the galaxy from the shadows, marked by pain, silence, and the knowledge of how close he had come to ending the Sith once and for all. Clone troopers were bred to follow orders without question. They were designed for loyalty, precision, and obedience. When Order 66 was activated, the command turned them against the very Jedi they had served beside for years. To the galaxy, it looked like cold efficiency. Clones cut down generals they had trusted, often without hesitation. But the truth is more complicated. The inhibitor chips implanted in their brains forced compliance, overriding their will. Yet the memories of what they did not vanish. Many clones carried the weight of Order 66, remembering every moment, even though they could not stop themselves at the time. The chips were created to remove choice. When the command triggered, it was not a matter of loyalty breaking, it was programming. The Jedi had trusted their soldiers, believing the bond they shared was unshakable. In many cases, it was clones fought with Jedi across countless battles, saved their lives, and built friendships that went deeper than military duty. Then, with the single spoken order, those bonds were destroyed. A clone could feel the bond, could even feel the shock of turning his weapon on a comrade. But the body obeyed what the chip demanded. This is why Order 66 was so devastating. It was not betrayal in the sense of choice. It was betrayal written into their biology. Imagine a clone standing in a hangar with his Jedi general. A moment earlier they discussed tactics or shared a laugh. The command entered his mind, and suddenly the rifle lifted. His voice might still carry respect, but his finger pulled the trigger. He could not resist. Yet afterward, the memory of the act would remain. He would remember the face of the Jedi falling, the trust in their eyes, and the knowledge that he had been the one to end them. For some clones, like Rex, the truth of the inhibitor chips eventually came to light. When his chip was removed, he regained full control. And with that came the guilt of knowing what his brothers had done under control they never asked for. For others who never escaped, the memories likely haunted them for the rest of their lives. Even when they followed the Empire, some may have carried silent conflict, unable to speak of it but unable to forget. This burden is part of what made the clones different from droids. Droids could execute orders without care. Clones were men with feelings, individuality, and loyalty. That loyalty was twisted against them. The inhibitor chip forced action, but it did not erase memory. The pain of Order 66 lived with them, even if they never showed it. The tragedy of the clones is that they fought alongside the Jedi as brothers, only to become their executioners without choice. They remembered every detail, even if they could not resist in the moment. That memory became a scar deeper than any wound, a mark of the control the Sith held, not only over the Jedi, but over the soldiers bred to serve them. Grogu entered the galaxy's story as a mystery. A child of the same rare species as Yoda, he carried immense potential in the Force, even at his young age. Though he looked small and fragile, he revealed powers that rivaled trained Jedi. From lifting creatures many times his size to healing wounds with the Force, Grogu showed abilities far beyond his years. This has led many to see him not only as special, but as destined to become the guiding figure for his generation, much like Yoda was in his time. Yoda lived for 9 centuries and shaped the Jedi Order for centuries as its Grand Master. His wisdom came from long experience and deep connection to the Force. Grogu, though still a child, shows the same natural affinity at 50 years old. He is still only beginning his life, yet he already demonstrates knowledge and control most Padawans would struggle to achieve. He used Force healing, an ability Yoda never openly displayed, and one that few Jedi knew how to practice. This shows that Grogu's connection to the living Force is not only strong but unique. The path of Grogu is already marked by choice. He trained briefly with Luke Skywalker, who offered him the chance to become a Jedi. Yet Grogu chose to return to Din Djarin, the Mandalorian who had become his guardian. This decision reflects something Yoda himself taught, that the Force is not only about discipline and study, but also about connection and compassion. Grogu values loyalty and attachment, qualities the Jedi often suppressed. Instead of weakening him, these bonds may one day give him a deeper understanding of balance. In this way, Grogu could redefine what it means to serve the Force. Imagine the galaxy decades after the fall of the Empire. Jedi as an institution may still struggle to return. The Sith may rise again, as they always seem to, and the balance will tilt once more. In that age, Grogu will no longer be a child. He will carry centuries ahead of him, time enough to grow in wisdom and strength. Just as Yoda once became the symbol of guidance for an entire era, Grogu could emerge as the voice of patience, resilience, and hope for those who come after. His small frame and quiet nature hide what could become a towering presence in the Force. Examples of his destiny already appear in small ways. In moments of danger, Grogu acts with instinctive precision. He shielded allies from fire, calmed raging beasts, and even choked enemies when anger touched him. These flashes reveal the dual paths before him, the compassion that heals and the fear that destroys. Yoda himself once warned that fear leads to the dark side, and Grogu's journey will require him to confront those same risks. Yet his bond with Din shows that love can also be a source of strength, shaping him into something beyond the narrow rules of the old Jedi. Grogu's destiny is tied not only to power but to the passage of time. His species matures slowly, meaning he will watch generations of humans rise and fall. With patience shaped by centuries, he may one day stand as Yoda once did, a steady voice when the galaxy faces chaos. His role is not only to fight battles, but to embody the balance of the Force in a way few others can. Grogu carries the promise of being the new Yoda of his generation, not by copying the past, but by walking a path uniquely his own. R2-D2 stood at the center of galactic history, yet he was often treated as a simple astromech droid. He served on starships, patched up systems, and rolled into battles without hesitation. What set him apart was not only his courage, but his memory. Unlike most droids, R2 was never wiped. He carried every moment of his long service within his circuits. From the Clone Wars to the fall of the Empire, he remembered everything. He saw secrets, betrayals, and truths that could have reshaped the galaxy. Yet he never revealed them. He beeped and whistled, loyal to his friends, but silent about the weight of all he knew. This choice to leave his memory intact makes R2 unique. Protocol droids like C-3PO were wiped frequently to keep them from developing too much independence. Battle droids were programmed for simple orders, their memories reset after campaigns. R2-D2, however, retained each mission. He knew Anakin Skywalker as a brave pilot and friend. He witnessed his fall into Darth Vader. He carried the plans of the Death Star, navigated Luke Skywalker through danger, and stood by Leia when she called for help. In each era, he was present, recording events through sensors and data storage. The galaxy moved forward, but R2 never forgot. Imagine what it meant for him to carry the memory of Anakin. He knew the man who laughed in the cockpit, who trusted him with his life. Later, he stood by Luke, who looked to R2 as a companion. R2 knew the truth before Luke did, that his father had become the very enemy he fought. Yet R2 never revealed this. He did not speak of the horrors he had witnessed on Mustafar, or the Jedi he saw cut down during the Purge. His silence protected Luke from a truth too heavy to bear too soon. There were also the countless small memories, the details of friendships and choices that shaped the galaxy. He remembered Padme Faye Amidala's kindness. He remembered the clone troopers who treated him as part of the team. He remembered Yoda, Obi-Wan, and the countless leaders who came and went. His beeps often carried hints of humor or frustration, as if he wanted to say more. But the full truth stayed locked in his memory banks. R2's silence was not weakness. It was loyalty. He seemed to understand that the galaxy was not ready for every secret he held. If he had revealed all he knew at once, it could have changed Luke's path, disrupted Leia's leadership, or broken the fragile unity of the rebellion. Instead, he carried the burden alone. His personality, often playful and stubborn, hid the depth of the knowledge within him. Picture R2, sitting idle in the corner of a hangar, whistling quietly while heroes debated the fate of the galaxy. None of them realized. The little droid beside them had already seen more than any living being in the room. He had watched empires rise and fall, carried maps to hidden systems, and stored truths that could alter history. But he kept them safe, locked behind his simple chirps, waiting for the moments when action spoke louder than words. Chewbacca was known across the galaxy as Han Solo's loyal companion. Their bond was built on friendship, trust, and the Wookiee tradition of a life debt. Han saved Chewbacca, and in return, Chewbacca swore to protect him until the end of his days. But Chewbacca's loyalty went beyond one man. His ties to the Jedi ran deep, and his life debt extended to their cause as well. He fought beside them during the Clone Wars, witnessed their fall, and carried that bond into the Age of the Rebellion. During the Clone Wars, Chewbacca fought alongside Yoda on Kashyyyk. The Jedi Master trusted him, not only as a soldier but as a friend. Chewbacca helped defend his people against the separatist droid army, proving his strength and resolve. More importantly, when Order 66 was given, Chewbacca stood by Yoda instead of turning on him. He aided in Yoda's escape, risking his life to ensure the Jedi Master could survive. That moment alone placed him in the debt of the Jedi, not through tradition, but through shared loyalty and respect. He had seen the Jedi's honor firsthand, and he never forgot it. When Han Solo and Chewbacca later became tangled in the fight against the Empire, Chewbacca's role cannot be seen as only repayment to Han. His choice to stay with the rebellion echoed his earlier bond to the Jedi. Luke Skywalker, the son of Anakin, represented a continuation of what Chewbacca had already pledged himself to long ago. He fought by Luke's side, protected him in battle, and trusted him in ways that went beyond obligation. It was not a coincidence that the Wookiee warrior followed a path that kept him aligned with the heirs of the Jedi Order. Consider the risks Chewbacca faced. He could have walked away after paying his debt to Han many times over. Smugglers, mercenaries, and warriors of his skill had no shortage of opportunities in the galaxy. Yet Chewbacca stayed in the fight that mattered most, the one against the Empire, the very system that destroyed the Jedi and enslaved countless worlds, including his own people. His life debt became larger than one man. It became tied to an idea, the survival of hope, and the protection of those who carried the Jedi's light. In practice, Chewbacca showed this loyalty through action. On Endor, he risked capture to sabotage Imperial vehicles. On Hoth, he stayed at Han's side in the freezing wasteland, ensuring his friend's survival, but also protecting Luke, who was the last hope of the Jedi. Later, when the new generation rose, Chewbacca followed Rey as well, recognizing in her the same spark he had once seen in Yoda and Luke. His debt lived on, passed from one Jedi to another, never ending because it was never tied to one life alone. The Wookiee Code of Honor gave Chewbacca a reason to stay with Han, but his own heart gave him a reason to stand with the Jedi. He carried the memory of fighting beside Yoda, the burden of watching the Jedi fall, and the promise of protecting those who carried their legacy forward. His life debt was not only to a smuggler who freed him, but to an order that had fought with him, trusted him, and shown him the path of loyalty that defined his life. The fall of the Jedi Council is often explained as the result of Palpatine's manipulation and the power of the Sith. While the Sith played their part, the deeper truth is that the Council collapsed under its own weight. The Jedi had grown arrogant. They believed themselves the guardians of truth, incapable of error, and blind to their own flaws. That arrogance left them unable to see the Sith's rise and unable to protect the very republic they claimed to serve. The Jedi began as seekers of balance. Over centuries, however, they became an institution tied to politics and war. During the Clone Wars, they acted as generals leading armies, a role far removed from their origins as keepers of peace. By sitting in the Senate chambers and taking commands from politicians, they blurred the line between service and control. Palpatine exploited this shift, but he did not create it. The Jedi chose to place themselves in the position of warriors and rulers, convinced that their wisdom made them the only ones fit to guide the Republic. Their arrogance showed most clearly in their dealings with Anakin Skywalker. They knew he was powerful, perhaps the most powerful Jedi of his age, but they doubted him at every turn. They recognized his skill but mistrusted his emotions. Instead of guiding him with openness, they placed him under constant suspicion. They denied him the rank of master while asking him to spy on Palpatine, pushing him into isolation. They believed they could control him, that their authority alone was enough to keep him loyal. In their pride, they failed to see how their treatment drove him into the hands of the Sith. The Council also ignored the signs of the dark side's return. Yoda sensed the growing shadow, but the Council dismissed the possibility that the Sith could rise under their watch. They believed their insight made them untouchable. Even as Palpatine stood before them daily, clouding their vision, they assumed they could not be deceived. By the time they realized the truth, the Sith had already wrapped their influence around every corner of the Republic. Imagine a council chamber, where 12 masters sit in a circle, each confident in their judgment. They speak of the Force, but their actions are bound by procedure and politics. A prophecy speaks of the chosen one who will bring balance. Yet they argue about what it means instead of trusting the will of the Force. Their pride convinces them that balance must come through their own control. In that chamber, they were already blind to the truth that balance would require their fall. Palpatine was clever, but his success depended on the Jedi's weakness. The Council's arrogance made them predictable. They rejected voices that challenged them, like Qui-Gon Jinn, who warned against their rigid thinking. They placed faith in their institution rather than in the Force itself. When the moment of betrayal came, they were unprepared not because they lacked power, but because they lacked humility. Snoke appeared in the galaxy as a mysterious figure. He carried himself as supreme leader of the First Order, commanding fleets and warriors with the authority of someone who had risen from nowhere to reshape the balance of power. His connection to the dark side was undeniable. He influenced Ben Solo, twisted him into Kylo Ren, and sought to rebuild the Sith legacy in another form. Yet Snoke was not the master he pretended to be. He was the result of Palpatine's experiments, a failed clone designed to serve as a vessel or tool. His strength was real, but it was borrowed, his life engineered in hidden laboratories where the Emperor worked to cheat death. Palpatine had long sought immortality. He studied cloning, dark rituals, and manipulation of midi-chlorians. After his fall on the second Death Star, his body was destroyed, but his spirit lingered. To return, he required hosts, bodies that could contain his power. These experiments produced forms like Snoke, unstable but still usable. The scars and deformities on Snoke's body reflected that instability. His frame was twisted, his face marred, not by age alone, but by the failure of the cloning process. Yet even in that state, Palpatine could channel enough dark side energy through him to make him a dangerous leader. Snoke's rise was not the story of a lone Sith climbing from obscurity. It was the result of design. Palpatine's followers on Exegol cultivated him, setting him up as a front for the First Order. To the galaxy, Snoke looked like a new master. To those who created him, he was nothing more than a puppet. His thoughts and ambitions were shaped by Palpatine's will. His authority rooted in deception. The Supreme Leader appeared to command, but the true hand-guiding events remained hidden. This explains why Snoke was able to wield such power yet remain vulnerable. He struck fear into the minds of his followers. He crushed opponents with raw force ability, throwing enemies across rooms and bridging connections between Rey and Kylo Ren. But when his end came, it revealed the flaw in his nature. Kylo Ren turned on him and cut him down. A true Sith Lord would have foreseen such betrayal. But Snoke's existence was limited. He was not built to last. His death was not the end of the plan, but a step in Palpatine's design. One clone discarded when it had served its purpose. Imagine the labs on Exegol, filled with failed bodies in tanks. Rows of deformed figures float in silence, experiments that never became whole. Snoke was the one that lived long enough to serve. His body carried the scars of countless attempts, a reminder that he was never a natural being. He was created to extend Palpatine's reach, to serve as a mask while the true master gathered strength. Every order he gave, every battle he commanded, was part of a plan he did not truly own. His life was power without freedom, authority without independence. When Anakin Skywalker died aboard the second Death Star, he redeemed himself in the eyes of his son. He destroyed the Emperor, saved Luke, and finally let go of Darth Vader. His spirit appeared later as a Force ghost, standing with Obi-Wan and Yoda, glowing with the light of the Jedi once more. To many, this seemed like closure, the end of his story, but the truth may not be so simple. Redemption does not erase a lifetime of darkness. Anakin's ghost may have joined the Force, yet he still carried the weight of what he had done, and that struggle may have followed him even in death. The Jedi who became Force ghosts, Obi-Wan, Yoda, Qui-Gon, entered the afterlife with peace. They accepted the will of the Force and let go of their attachments. Anakin's path was not the same. He lived decades as Darth Vader, consumed by hatred, fear, and anger. He killed Jedi, destroyed worlds, and hunted those he once called allies. His final act was one of sacrifice, but it did not erase the memories or the emotions tied to that long fall. His ghost may have stood in light, but the shadow of Vader could not have vanished completely. Imagine a man who carried such immense guilt, suddenly freed from his body. The Force itself may have allowed him to endure, but the process of letting go would not be instant. Anakin's ghost might still hear the voices of the past, the screams of those he killed, the burning of Mustafar, the betrayal of friends. In the quiet of the afterlife, those memories would not disappear. Instead, they would become part of his struggle, the constant test of whether he could remain in balance or fall again to bitterness. This helps explain why Anakin's presence after death is so limited. Obi-Wan guided Luke often, Yoda appeared to offer wisdom. But Anakin's ghost was seen only briefly. Perhaps he did not speak because he was not ready. To counsel Luke or future generations, he would need clarity. If he was still wrestling with his identity, Anakin or Vader, he may have kept himself distant, unwilling to taint others with the shadow he carried. His silence could have been a form of penance, a way to confront his own darkness without passing it on. The Force ghost itself may reflect this inner struggle. Light and dark exist within balance. Unlike other Jedi who entered the afterlife whole, Anakin crossed that threshold split in two. His ghost may have been pulled between the serenity of Anakin Skywalker and the rage of Darth Vader. In moments of peace, he could stand beside Yoda and Obi-Wan. In moments of weakness, he might feel the cold pull of the dark side, even within the Force. The battle that defined his life did not end with his final breath. It continued in another form, one without armor, but just as real. Anakin's ghost represents hope, but also the truth that redemption does not erase the past. His struggle may never end. The dark side was his companion for too long to vanish entirely, and in death, he must still face it, again and again, as part of the balance he was born to embody. The Death Star was more than a weapon of steel and engineering. At its core was the power of the Force itself, bound and twisted through the kyber crystals that fueled its superlaser. Kyber crystals are living conduits of the Force. Jedi used them in their lightsabers, drawing on their natural harmony. The Empire stripped entire worlds of these crystals, corrupting them through fear and control. Some believe the largest crystal inside the Death Star was not only mined, but taken from a Jedi's lightsaber and bled into submission, its natural light turned into destruction. Kyber crystals do not shatter easily. They resonate with energy and respond to those attuned to the Force. A Jedi finds a crystal through guidance, and the bond makes the saber an extension of their spirit. When the Sith take crystals, they cannot bond with them in the same way. They force the crystal to yield, pouring rage into it until it bleeds red. The Death Star's weapon may have been created through the same act, only on a massive scale. By corrupting one pure crystal, the Empire may have created a chain reaction, linking it to others and amplifying its destructive power. Imagine a Jedi's saber, once glowing blue or green, cut down in battle. The crystal is taken, brought to Imperial scientists and Sith cultists who know how to twist it. They place it in chambers where dark side energy pours over it, draining its harmony. What once sang in balance becomes warped. That corrupted crystal becomes the seed for the superweapon. In this way, the Death Star's fire was not just energy. It was the scream of a crystal forced to betray its nature, magnified until it shattered entire planets. This theory helps explain why the Death Star was so unstable. Both battle stations had flaws that led to their destruction. Engineering played a role, but kyber crystals are not designed to be chained and controlled in such a way. They are alive in the Force, and forcing them to channel destruction on such a scale could have made them volatile. When Luke fired into the reactor, the reaction may have been more than machinery breaking. It could have been the crystal itself reaching a breaking point, unable to hold the corruption any longer. The symbolism is also powerful. The Jedi carried kyber crystals as a symbol of life, defense, and discipline. The Empire twisted that same source of power into death. By taking what was once a Jedi's, they turned hope into terror. The destruction of Alderaan was not only political, it was spiritual. A wound in the Force caused by a corrupted crystal meant to guide a Jedi. If true, this makes the Death Star more than a technological terror. It was a desecration of the Force itself. Every shot fired was the result of a crystal that had once been pure, a reminder that the Sith could not create, but only corrupt. The super laser was proof of what happens when harmony is bent to rage, when something meant to protect is forced to destroy on a scale no Jedi would ever allow. When Rey ignited her new lightsaber at the end of her journey, the blade glowed yellow. For most of galactic history, Jedi carried sabers of blue or green, and the Sith wielded red. Each color carried meaning, shaped by the crystal's bond with the user. Blue often marked guardians who focused on combat and defense. Green was tied to those who looked deeper into the mysteries of the Force. Counselors and wise seekers. Red signified corruption. Crystals forced to bleed under the weight of Sith rage. But yellow was rare. It marked balance, standing between roles and philosophies. For Rey, the yellow blade revealed more than a choice of weapon. It reflected her place between light and dark, a harmony that set her apart from those who came before. Rey's path was never simple. She was not raised in the Jedi Temple, trained from youth under strict guidance. She grew up alone, abandoned on Jakku, shaped by survival. Her power in the Force emerged instinctively without the discipline of teachers. When she found Luke, he resisted training her. And even when he agreed, he warned her about the pull of the dark side. Rey felt that pull strongly. She was a descendant of Palpatine, and the shadow of that bloodline weighed heavily on her. She could unleash fury, channeling raw power. Yet she also showed compassion that anchored her to the light. The yellow blade captured this duality. It was neither the blue of tradition nor the green of deep wisdom. It was a symbol of one who walks between. In the old Jedi Order, yellow blades were often carried by temple guards, those who protected the heart of the Order, but did not sit among the council. They embodied service and neutrality, warriors who defended knowledge without being consumed by politics or pride. Rey's saber echoed that legacy, suggesting she was not meant to be a master in the old mold, but a guardian of something new. Imagine the moment she built it. She did not take a crystal from the old stockpiles. She found her own, one that resonated with her alone. The act of building the weapon was more than construction. It was the crystal choosing her, reflecting her balance. When she ignited it, the yellow glow showed that she had embraced both sides of her nature, the light she fought for and the shadow she could not deny. Instead of rejecting one half, she allowed both to exist, creating a unity stronger than denial. This balance is why Rey stood apart from past Jedi. Anakin fell because he could not reconcile his fear with his duty. Luke struggled because he rejected attachments until he nearly lost everything. The Jedi Council collapsed because they clung to pride and ignored emotion. Rey's blade symbolized a different path. She accepted her darkness without letting it rule her. She embraced compassion without letting it blind her. The yellow saber was her truth, a visible sign of balance achieved. Han Solo spent much of his life claiming he did not believe in the Force. When Luke first spoke of it aboard the Millennium Falcon, Han dismissed it as superstition. To him, blasters, ships, and credits were real. The Force was not. Yet his actions often revealed something different. Beneath the words, Han showed a quiet recognition that the Force was real, even if he refused to admit it openly. Deep down, he believed, because too many things in his life pointed to its presence. Han grew up on Corellia, where survival mattered more than faith. He became a smuggler, shaped by crime lords and betrayal, and learned to trust only himself and his ship. In that world, belief in the Force had little place. Yet even then, Han's instincts guided him in ways that mirrored trust in something larger. He often survived impossible odds, slipping through blockades and escaping traps. To him, it was skill and luck. But skill and luck can look a lot like the Force moving in quiet ways. When he met Luke and Obi-Wan, Han mocked their talk of destiny, but at every turn, he chose actions that aligned him with the Force's path. He could have walked away after being paid for transporting them. Instead, he returned to save Luke at the Battle of Yavin, clearing the way for the shot that destroyed the Death Star. That choice did not come from profit. It came from trust in something unseen, an instinct that Luke mattered, that this fight mattered. Whether he admitted it or not, the Force was already pulling him into its current. Han's bond with Leia also revealed his unspoken belief. Their connection was not only built on shared battles, but on something deeper, a pull between them that echoed the kind of ties the Jedi often described. Han never spoke of it in mystical terms, but his loyalty and his willingness to sacrifice showed that he felt something greater than chance tied them together. Later, when they had a son, Han faced the painful truth of Ben's fall into Kylo Ren. Han did not speak of the Force when he confronted him, but he trusted love to reach through the darkness. That act, stepping onto the bridge unarmed, was belief in its purest form, the sense that something beyond weapons could turn the tide. Even in his later years, Han could not fully deny what he had seen. He stood beside Luke. He watched Rey call the lightsaber to her hand, and he lived through moments no skeptic could explain when Rey asked him about the Force. Han finally admitted the truth. He said, "It was real, all of it." That confession showed what had always been there beneath his sarcasm and doubt. Han had witnessed too much, felt too much, to remain a non-believer. Han Solo never prayed to the Force or spoke like a Jedi, but he lived with its presence guiding him. His words denied it, but his choices revealed it. Every time he stepped into danger for others, every time he trusted instinct over calculation, he showed that deep down he had always believed. Darth Maul was seen by many as a weapon rather than a thinker. He entered the stage of galactic history as the silent apprentice of Darth Sidious, trained in combat, stealth, and hatred. His double-bladed lightsaber and ferocity marked him as an enforcer, not a scholar. Yet beneath the surface, Maul understood far more than Palpatine gave him credit for. His years in the shadows and his survival after being cut down revealed a knowledge of the Sith prophecy that even Sidious, blinded by his own ambition, did not fully grasp. The Sith prophecy spoke of the Chosen One, a being who would bring balance to the Force. The Jedi feared and misinterpreted it believing balance meant the end of darkness. The Sith twisted it into a promise of dominance. Palpatine saw the prophecy as a tool to exploit Anakin Skywalker, molding him into Darth Vader to secure eternal power. Maul, however, saw the prophecy from another angle. His obsession with revenge and his deep connection to ancient Sith teachings gave him insight into the endless cycle of dark and light. After his defeat on Naboo, Maul should have died. He was cut in half and cast into the depths. Yet his hatred sustained him. For years he lived on scraps, rebuilding his body with metal and surviving through raw willpower. In that time he descended into madness, but he also gained perspective. He saw that the Sith obsession with control was flawed. Sidious sought order and empire, but Maul recognized the truth, that the Force would always swing back and forth, balancing light and dark no matter what either side desired. His survival itself became proof of that cycle. When he rose again, Maul no longer served Sidious. He built his own power, but not with the illusions of empire. He turned to the criminal underworld, seizing control through fear and influence. In his conversations with Ezra Bridger years later, he spoke of knowledge and destiny, showing an awareness of the larger design at play. Maul knew he was not the chosen one, but he understood that such figures appeared across history. His hunt for Kenobi was not only about revenge, but about ending the one man who stood at the crossroads of that prophecy, guarding the future of Luke Skywalker. Palpatine believed he could twist the prophecy into his victory, but Maul knew better. He recognized that even the greatest Sith could not escape its weight. He warned others of the cycles of rise and fall, and he placed himself within that story as more than a discarded apprentice. In his final duel with Obi-Wan, Maul spoke not only as a warrior, but as someone who had come to terms with destiny. He asked if Luke was the chosen one, showing that he understood the prophecy's reach more than Sidious ever admitted. Maul's strength was not just in his blades, but in his insight. He saw the prophecy as truth, not as a tool. In this, he stood closer to understanding the will of the Force than the master who had once trained him. When Jedi Masters died, some of them did not vanish completely. They became Force ghosts, luminous beings who kept their identity even after death. They appeared to guide the living, offering advice and warnings. To most, their role seemed limited. They spoke, they offered wisdom, but they did not act. Yet the truth is more complex. The Force ghosts could influence reality far more than they admitted. Their restraint was a choice, not a limitation. The first sign of this came with Obi-Wan Kenobi. After allowing Vader to strike him down, Obi-Wan continued to speak to Luke. At first, his voice guided Luke during the trench run over the Death Star, reminding him to trust the Force. That voice was not only a memory, it was an active presence that reached Luke in the middle of battle. Later, Obi-Wan appeared in full form, showing that death had not removed his ability to act. If he could speak across distance and time, what else could he have done? His choice to remain a guide instead of intervening directly suggests discipline, not inability. Yoda's appearance decades later proved the point further. When he spoke to Luke on Arch, he did more than offer counsel. He summoned lightning to strike the old Jedi texts. The act was physical, shaping the world of the living. Yoda laughed as the tree burned, proving that Force ghosts could do more than watch. They could act with power, bending reality if they wished. His strike showed that the boundary between life and death was not as firm as it seemed. Anakin's ghost also carried weight. Though he appeared only briefly, his presence itself carried influence. For a man who had been Darth Vader, to return in the form of Anakin was a message to Luke and to the galaxy that redemption was real. His existence changed Luke's resolve. That is influence beyond simple conversation. The Force ghost is not just an image. It is a channel of the Force that bends the will of the living. Imagine what it means for these ghosts to choose silence. Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin could have shouted warnings from beyond. They could have revealed secrets, pointed to dangers, or even intervened with greater displays of power. But they did not. They restrained themselves, likely knowing that too much interference would deny the living their choices. Still, their restraint does not erase their potential. If Yoda could call down lightning, there is no telling what other acts a ghost might shape if the balance required it. The Sith also sought this knowledge, though in twisted form. They tried to bind their spirits to objects, to cheat death by clinging to the physical world. Palpatine himself returned through such means. The Sith's crude attempts at immortality show that even they understood what the Jedi ghosts could do, though they never found the same purity of presence. Where the Sith clung, the Jedi flowed. Where the Sith corrupted, the Jedi preserved. Force ghosts held back, letting the living bear the burden of destiny. Yet their rare actions revealed that they could touch fire, stone, and storm. They could alter reality itself. They simply chose not to reveal the full extent of their power, allowing history to move forward without them standing as gods among mortals. The galaxies saw the Jedi and the Sith as opposites. One stood for peace, the other for domination. One claimed selflessness, the other embraced passion. Yet both came from the same root, long before they were split into two warring orders. There was a single group of Force users who sought to understand the power that bound the galaxy together. Over time, disagreements over how to use that power led to division. The Jedi and the Sith became enemies, but their connection remained, two sides of a broken whole. The earliest Force users did not call themselves Jedi or Sith. They were seekers who studied balance. They understood that the Force contained both light and dark, creation and destruction. Their purpose was to walk between those sides. But as centuries passed, conflict grew over how to live with that balance. Some believed restraint was the only way. They preached detachment, control, and peace as a path to avoid corruption. Others argued that to deny emotion was to deny life itself. They embraced passion, believing strength came from the full range of feelings. What began as debate turned into schism, and the ancient order fractured. The Jedi chose to build their temple, codifying rules that limited attachment and passion. They valued discipline above all. Their philosophy was designed to hold back the dark, but in doing so, they also rejected part of the Force's nature. The Sith emerged from those who broke away, embracing the opposite view. They wielded the dark side openly, feeding on anger and desire, claiming that power without limits was the true path. Both believed they were right. Both forgot that they were born from the same pursuit. This history explains why the two orders mirror one another. The Jedi practice self-control, but pride often blinds them. The Sith chase strength, but obsession consumes them. One side denies emotion, the other drowns in it. Both are caught in extremes. Their wars across millennia were less about destroying each other and more about trying to prove that one half of the truth could stand without the other. The cycle of conflict between them is the clearest sign that they were never meant to be whole on their own. Consider the prophecy of the Chosen One. It spoke of balance, not victory. The Jedi assumed it meant the destruction of the Sith. The Sith twisted it into a promise of domination. Both misunderstood it, because both came from the same incomplete vision. Balance required more than defeat. It required reconciliation of light and dark, a return to what the first Force users once knew. Anakin Skywalker was created in this tension, embodying both the hope of the Jedi and the fear of the Sith. His life showed that the line between the two was thinner than either side wanted to admit. The ancient order split because of pride, but its truth never disappeared. The Jedi and the Sith are not opposites born apart. They are fragments of one origin, clinging to halves of a philosophy that was never meant to be divided. Their endless struggle is not simply war. It is the attempt to resolve a wound left when one order became two. Qui-Gon Jinn was unlike most Jedi of his time. While the Council clung to tradition and rigid rules, Qui-Gon listened directly to the will of the Force. He often defied orders, trusting instinct over protocol. This independence led him to discoveries that even Yoda, with centuries of wisdom, had not pursued. Among these discoveries were secrets about life, death, and the Force itself. Qui-Gon uncovered knowledge that Yoda respected, but also feared, for it touched on mysteries that challenged the foundations of the Jedi Order. The clearest example of this was Qui-Gon's discovery of how to retain consciousness after death. For thousands of years, Jedi believed that when they died, they became one with the Force, their individuality dissolving into the greater whole. The Sith tried to twist this truth, binding their spirits to objects or places through unnatural means. Qui-Gon found another path. Through deep meditation and connection to the living Force, he learned how to preserve identity beyond death. It was not immortality, but a continuation of the self as a guide for those still alive. This was not recorded in the archives. It was a truth he found on his own, a secret too profound to be dismissed as chance. When Qui-Gon died on Naboo, he did not vanish completely. His spirit endured, speaking first to Yoda and then to Obi-Wan. This revelation stunned Yoda. For all his years, he had not unlocked this ability. Qui-Gon showed that the Force held powers even the Council had overlooked. Yoda did not fear Qui-Gon himself, but he feared what the discovery meant. If death was not the end, then the Jedi understanding of sacrifice, legacy, and even detachment had to be re-examined. Such a truth could shake the foundations of the Order, already strained by war and pride. Qui-Gon's secrets extended beyond life after death. He believed the Force was not meant to be controlled through rigid codes, but experienced directly. He taught that listening to the living Force was more important than clinging to prophecy or dogma. When he found Anakin, he recognized the boy's potential not because the Council told him, but because the Force spoke to him. This faith in instinct allowed him to see truths others missed. It also placed him at odds with the Council, who distrusted paths they could not control. Yoda valued discipline above all, and Qui-Gon's free approach likely unsettled him. It showed that even the greatest master could not grasp every mystery of the Force. Imagine Qui-Gon in meditation, hearing whispers of the Force guiding him toward visions of the future. He would see threads of balance, light and dark, entwined, and truths that frightened those who preferred stability. Yoda admitted later that he had much to learn from Qui-Gon, proving that even the wisest feared the implications of his discoveries. Qui-Gon's pursuit of the living Force pushed boundaries the Jedi had long avoided, revealing that the greatest secrets were not locked in archives, but waiting for those who dared to listen without fear. The Darksaber was more than a weapon, forged by Tara Vizsla, the first Mandalorian Jedi. It carried with it the weight of history and the authority of rule. Whoever held the blade had claimed to lead Mandalore, not through politics, but through tradition. Over centuries, the Darksaber became a symbol that could unite the scattered clans or divide them further. In the era after the Empire's fall, its importance grew once more. The Darksaber was not just a relic, it was a deciding factor in the galaxy's fate. The weapon itself is unique. Unlike standard lightsabers, the Darksaber's blade is black with a glowing white edge, a reflection of the bond between Mandalorian steel and Jedi crystal. Its design embodies conflict and balance, a fusion of two worlds that rarely stood together. For Mandalorians, the blade represented strength and legitimacy. For Jedi, it was a reminder of the one warrior who bridged their order with the clans. That dual nature made it more than a tool of war. It became a question of destiny throughout history. The Darksaber appeared during turning points. When Mandalorians fought among themselves, it was the weapon that settled disputes. When outsiders sought to control Mandalore, it became the rallying point for resistance. Whoever wielded it could unify or fracture the clans. Its legacy carried so much weight that even those who doubted the old ways respected its power. That is why it mattered when Din Djarin, a bounty hunter with no claim to leadership, came into possession of it. By defeating Moff Gideon, he won the blade by combat. With that victory came responsibility he never sought. Din's ownership placed the galaxy at a crossroads. The Mandalorians had long been scattered, their homeworld devastated by war and imperial control. With the Darksaber, Din could bring them together. A united Mandalore would shift the balance of power. They were warriors, feared across the galaxy, capable of challenging both remnants of the Empire and even the fragile New Republic. Without unity, Mandalorians remained mercenaries, strong in small numbers, but too divided to shape events. The Darksaber was the key to that unity. The danger lay in how it was claimed. Mandalorian tradition demanded that the blade be won in battle. To take it by gift or inheritance was to dishonor the symbol. This created conflict even among allies. Bo-Katan Kryze, who sought to lead her people, could not accept the blade unless she defeated Din for it. The rule ensured that leadership came through strength, but it also risked endless division. The fate of the galaxy depended not only on who held the Darksaber, but on whether they could wield it without tearing Mandalorians apart. Imagine Mandalore restored, its clans flying together under one banner, led by the one who proved worthy of the Darksaber. Their armies could tip the balance in any future conflict, whether against Imperial remnants, Sith cults, or even Jedi. The galaxy has always shifted when Mandalorians entered the field with unity and purpose. The Darksaber is the deciding factor, the one weapon that turns a scattered people into a force, capable of shaping destiny. Its edge cuts more than steel. It cuts through the question of who will lead and whether the galaxy will face war or balance in the years to come. Kylo Ren's fall is often blamed on Supreme Leader Snoke, who manipulated him and pushed him toward the dark side. Snoke's influence was real, but it was not the only shadow that shaped Ben Solo's choices. The deeper wound came from Luke Skywalker, his uncle and master, whose moment of doubt cut sharper than any Sith trick. Kylo was haunted not only by Snoke's voice, but by the memory of the night Luke ignited his saber considering, even for an instant, whether Ben should be destroyed. That doubt left a scar that never healed. Ben Solo grew up under the weight of legacy. He was the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa, and the grandson of Darth Vader. From birth, he was surrounded by stories of heroism and fear. He carried immense power in the Force, power that frightened those who watched him grow. Leia sent him to train with Luke, trusting her brother to guide him. To Ben, Luke was not just a master. He was family, a figure meant to protect and understand him. For someone already struggling with anger and identity, Luke's faith was essential. When that faith wavered, everything broke. The night of betrayal began with Luke, sensing the darkness rising in his nephew. For a fleeting moment, he feared what Ben might become. He ignited his lightsaber, not to strike, but in reaction to that fear. The instant passed, and Luke regretted it. But Ben had already seen the weapon aimed at him. To Ben it was proof that even the one man who should have trusted him had judged him unworthy. No words could erase that sight. From then on, every whisper from Snoke only reinforced what Ben already believed, that he was destined for the darkness, that the people closest to him would never truly accept him. This explains why Snoke's manipulation worked so easily. Snoke promised power and belonging. But his voice alone could not have broken Ben. It was Luke's hesitation that gave Snoke the opening. Ben carried that memory into every decision he made as Kylo Ren. He replayed it in his mind, not just the blade itself, but the feeling of betrayal. It haunted him because it came from love turned into fear. Strangers can hurt you, but when family doubts you, the wound reaches deeper. Consider Kylo's rage when facing Luke later on Crate. He unleashed the full force of his power, not only to destroy a Jedi Master, but to silence the ghost of that moment. He shouted, struck, and demanded acknowledgement, all because the doubt still burned in him. Luke's projection only deepened the torment, showing him that his uncle still loomed over his choices. Snoke never had that level of hold. Snoke was a manipulator, but Luke was the source of Kylo's inner conflict. Kylo Ren's mask, his anger, and his violence all carried the shadow of that night. He was not haunted by Snoke, who could be replaced, but by Luke's single moment of doubt, which could never be undone. It was the reminder that even in the light fear exists, and for Ben Solo, that fear came from the one person whose trust he needed most. Rey's story was often framed as one of bloodline. At first, the mystery of her parents hung over her like a question that would decide her worth. Some believed she must be connected to the Skywalkers, or Kenobi, as if power in the Force could only be explained through heritage. But the truth was different. Rey's parents were chosen not for who they were, but because the Force itself selected them to bring her into the galaxy. Her origin was not about family prestige or dynasty. It was about the will of the Force creating balance in a moment when darkness had grown too strong. The Jedi had long believed in prophecies and chosen figures. Anakin Skywalker was called the Chosen One, created through the Force to bring balance. His birth did not follow bloodline logic either. He was born to Shmi Skywalker without a father, a direct expression of the Force's will. In Rey, history echoed itself. Though her parents were ordinary people, the Force chose them as vessels to continue the cycle of balance. That choice ensured that power would not stay locked within one lineage. It reminded the galaxy that the Force belongs to all, not just to famous names. Rey's parents were not leaders or warriors. They had no throne, no connection to the Jedi or Sith. To many, this seemed to lessen her importance. But the Force often works through the unexpected. By choosing a line with no prestige, the Force made clear that greatness is not confined to heritage. Rey's parents gave her life and then died protecting her from the reach of Palpatine. Their choice to shield her, even in their final moments, aligned with the greater will of the Force. Through them, her path later confirmed this truth. She picked up Anakin's old saber, a weapon tied to the Skywalker line, and it responded to her. Many took this as proof she must be connected by blood, but the explanation is simpler. The lightsaber responded because the Force had chosen her. It guided her toward the destiny of confronting both the darkness of the Sith and the burden of legacy itself. Her parents mattered not for their power, but for being the vessels that allowed the Force to shape her. This perspective changes how we view her struggles with identity. Rey searched for belonging, believing her answer lay in finding her family, but the Force had already chosen her place. She was not meant to inherit power, but to embody it directly. When she confronted Kylo Ren, he mocked her origins, telling her she came from nothing. What he missed was that this was the point. She did not need a name to matter. She was chosen because the galaxy needed her, not because she carried a dynasty's shadow. The Force does not act by accident. Just as it created Anakin to shift the balance, it chose Rey's parents to bring her into the galaxy. Their role was not to pass down legacy, but to allow her to become what the galaxy needed. In this, Rey's story was not about bloodline, but about destiny shaped by the will of the Force itself. Darth Vader was one of the most powerful Force users the galaxy had ever seen. His command of the dark side was unmatched, fueled by anger, pain, and ambition. Yet even with his strength, he lived under the shadow of Palpatine. The Emperor designed Vader's existence to keep him bound, both through manipulation and through the limitations of his damaged body. Still, there was a path where Vader could have surpassed his master if he had embraced both the light and the dark, rather than clinging to only one. He could have become something greater than either Jedi or Sith. The Force is not divided by nature. It flows as one, with aspects of creation, destruction, compassion, and rage intertwined. The Jedi trained to suppress emotion, fearing corruption, while the Sith drowned themselves in passion, seeking control. Both extremes left their practitioners incomplete. Vader embodied the Sith obsession with power, but he still carried the remnants of Anakin Skywalker within him. The light never left him fully, even at his darkest. Had he chosen to accept both sides, instead of denying one half of himself, he might have reached a level of mastery beyond Palpatine's reach. Consider the Emperor's hold on Vader. Palpatine kept him chained by convincing him that the dark side alone granted true power. He fed Vader's anger and regret, using his pain as fuel, but also as a leash. At the same time, he exploited the guilt that Vader felt as Anakin, making him believe the light was forever lost to him. This kept Vader trapped, unable to reconcile who he had been with, who he had become. If Vader had broken this cycle, accepting his anger and his compassion together, he would have tapped into the Force in its totality. Such balance would have given him freedom from Palpatine's manipulations. There are hints of this possibility. In moments with Luke, the light side surfaced in Vader when he hesitated to strike his son down. It was not weakness but the memory of love. That love was a source of strength the Sith denied. Palpatine saw it as a threat, because he knew that embracing compassion while keeping his mastery of the dark would make Vader unstoppable. In the Emperor's throne room, when Vader finally acted to save Luke, he drew on both fury and love. That single choice showed what he could have been all along. For a brief moment, he became more powerful than Palpatine. Not through domination, but through balance. Imagine if Vader had reached that state earlier, free of the belief that he had to choose one path. He could have used his rage without letting it consume him, and his compassion without letting it weaken him. Such harmony would have made him the true master of the Force, beyond Jedi codes and Sith dogma. In that state, Palpatine's control would have shattered, and Vader's strength would have eclipsed even his master's. The tragedy is not that Vader lacked power, but that he never embraced both halves of himself until his final act. The galaxy has always been caught in cycles of war and uneasy calm. Republics rise, empires fall, rebellions ignite, and new orders take their place. Each age speaks of peace, but none has held it for long. The reason lies not in politics or weapons, but in the nature of the Force itself. The Force demands balance, and balance is never a permanent state. It is a constant exchange, a shifting of light and dark. Because of this, the galaxy will never truly know peace in the way its people often hope for it. When the Jedi held power during the Republic, they sought to preserve order through discipline and control. Their role as peacekeepers was noble in intent, but their dominance tilted the balance toward the light. By suppressing the dark and forbidding emotion, they left the shadow side of the Force unacknowledged. In time, that shadow grew stronger, finding expression through the Sith. Darth Sidious rose, not by accident, but because the galaxy had leaned too far in one direction. The emergence of the Sith was the Force's correction, pulling the scales back toward balance. The opposite is just as true. When the Sith rule, their empires thrive on passion, fear, and domination. They push the dark side to its height, drowning the galaxy in oppression. Yet the light never disappears. Instead, It gathers strength in resistance movements and hidden Jedi. Rebels rise, chosen figures appear, and the light strikes back. The fall of Palpatine was not only a victory for the rebellion, it was the Force restoring equilibrium. This cycle plays out across generations. Anakin Skywalker's life is a perfect example. Born of the Force itself, he was shaped to bring balance. But balance did not mean peace. His rise as Vader destroyed the Jedi and gave power to the Sith. Yet his final act restored the light. In both destruction and redemption, he fulfilled the prophecy. What followed was not lasting calm, but another shift, as new threats emerged and the struggle continued. The Force corrected, and the galaxy moved again between extremes. Rey and Kylo Ren's bond revealed this truth in another form. They represented opposite sides, yet were tied together by something deeper. Their connection was not an accident, but the Force creating a living example of balance. As long as one rose, the other was drawn to meet them. Even in their conflict, they reflected the endless demand of the Force for equal weight. The idea of peace as a final state ignores this reality. Peace is not the same as balance. Peace implies stillness, a permanent quiet where conflict no longer exists. Balance is dynamic, a constant adjustment, like a scale that tips one way and then another. The Force ensures that no side dominates forever. The galaxy's wars are symptoms of that truth. When one power grows too strong, the other emerges to oppose it. Imagine the future. Even if the Jedi were restored in full, the Sith or their heirs would return. Even if darkness claimed every star system, light would rise to challenge it. The galaxy cannot escape this rhythm because the Force itself drives it. That is why true peace, the kind without struggle, will never come. The galaxy will always be pulled back to balance. And balance always comes through conflict. The Ewoks of Endor were often dismissed as simple primitives. To outside eyes, they seemed to be small hunters with sticks and stones, unprepared for the might of the Empire. Yet their role in the Battle of Endor proved otherwise. They did not join the rebels by chance or by convenience. The Ewoks sensed something deeper moving through the galaxy, something they may not have named, but that guided them all the same. They felt the Force, and that connection pushed them to ally with the rebels against the Empire. The first meeting between the Ewoks and the rebel group showed how quickly they judged character. They captured Han, Luke, Chewbacca, and the others, seeing them at first as intruders. But their instincts pulled them toward Luke, most of all. He carried himself with calm and purpose, and the Ewoks recognized it even if they did not understand Jedi training. They bowed to C-3PO, mistaking him for a god, but their deeper trust rested with Luke. When Luke demonstrated his connection to the Force by lifting C-3PO into the air, the Ewoks immediately shifted from suspicion to loyalty. This reaction suggests more than superstition. It shows that they were sensitive to the presence of the Force and could feel its truth when it revealed itself. Their alliance with the rebels went far beyond fear or reverence. The Ewoks took great risk in joining the fight. The Empire had weapons of mass destruction, and stormtroopers carried blasters far deadlier than spears. By logic alone, siding with the rebels made little sense. But the Ewoks trusted that the fight was not about survival alone. They sensed the Empire's presence as a corruption of their world, something unnatural and oppressive. This intuition mirrors how the Jedi often described the dark side. The Ewoks did not need formal training to feel it. Their closeness to nature gave them awareness of imbalance in the Force. The battle itself highlighted this connection. The Ewoks fought with cunning, turning their forest into a weapon. They used traps, ambushes, and coordinated strikes that far exceeded what outsiders expected of them. In doing so, they mirrored the way the Force often worked, using the smallest and least expected agents to shift the course of destiny. Just as the Force chose a farm boy on Tatooine to confront the Sith, it chose the Ewoks to tip the scales in one of the galaxy's greatest battles. Their courage was not blind. It was guided by a sense of alignment with something larger. Consider their celebration after the Death Star's destruction. They did not cheer only for survival or victory. Their music and rituals carried a spiritual weight, as though they knew the galaxy had been set right. At least for a time, they honored their fallen and welcomed the rebels as family, showing that their bond went deeper than an alliance of convenience. It was trust in the living energy that had guided their choice all along. The Ewoks may not have spoken of the Force in Jedi terms, but they lived in harmony with it. Their decision to fight alongside the rebels was more than chance. They sensed where the balance lay and followed it, proving that the Force speaks even through the smallest of voices. The Clone Wars looked like a sudden eruption of conflict between the Republic and the Separatists. To most citizens of the galaxy, it seemed as though politics, trade disputes, and the ambitions of Count Dooku brought about the chaos. In truth, the war had roots that reached far deeper. It was not born overnight, nor was it only the design of one Sith Lord centuries. Before the first battle droid marched, Sith cults had been laying the foundation. The Clone Wars were not a spontaneous event, but the fulfillment of plans that had been whispered and shaped long before Sidious pulled the final strings. The Sith always understood the value of patience. Their order lived in secrecy after their defeat at the hands of the Jedi in the Great Wars of the Old Republic. The rule of two ensured that power passed quietly from master to apprentice, hidden until the moment was right. But alongside this main line of Sith, there were cults and sects scattered across the galaxy, dedicated to keeping the vision alive. These groups worked in shadows, feeding ancient knowledge, maintaining influence in politics and industry, and preparing for the day when the Sith could return openly. The Clone Wars were the stage they had long sought, and much of the groundwork was set centuries before. The Kaminoan cloning technology, for instance, did not fall into Sith hands by chance. Rumors speak of Sith agents guiding the early research into genetic manipulation, ensuring that such advancements would be ready when needed. The idea of creating a disposable army was not something the Jedi would have conceived, but it matched the Sith philosophy of control perfectly. By the time Sifo-Dyas placed the order for the clone army, the Sith cults had already ensured the infrastructure existed for the project to succeed. At the same time, these cults worked to weaken the Republic over generations. Corruption spread in the Senate, fueled by hidden hands offering bribes, promises, and whispered threats. Systems grew disillusioned with the central government, setting the stage for the separatist movement. By the time Count Dooku, a Sith apprentice, stepped into leadership, the conditions were already ripe for collapse. The cults had nurtured resentment, stoked greed, and left the Republic vulnerable. Dooku only had to give shape to what had been festering for decades. The Jedi, blinded by their trust in tradition, failed to see this long game. They believed the Sith extinct, dismissing evidence of their survival as superstition. Yet the Sith had never left. They worked through intermediaries, banking clans, trade guilds, and secret alliances. The Clone Wars unfolded like a trap that had been waiting for centuries, sprung at the moment when the Republic and the Jedi had grown arrogant enough to walk into it. Every battle, every planet drawn into the war, served the Sith design. The conflict bled the Jedi, spread them thin, and forced them into roles of generals rather than peacekeepers. The Republic became militarized, ready to accept an emperor when the war ended. None of this was accidental. The Clone Wars were the final act of a play that had been written generations earlier, orchestrated by Sith cults that never stopped preparing for the day when the galaxy would once again kneel to the dark side. Yoda's species has always been cloaked in mystery. Very little is known about their origin, their culture, or even their true numbers. What is clear, however, is their deep connection to the Force. From Yoda to Yaddle, and later to Grogu, every known member of this species has demonstrated an unusual strength in the Force from an early age. This is not coincidence. Their species is tied directly to the living Force in a way that sets them apart from other beings in the galaxy. The Jedi often spoke of two aspects of the Force: the living Force and the cosmic Force. The cosmic Force dealt with destiny, prophecy, and the long arc of balance. The living Force, on the other hand, was immediate. It flowed through every creature, every tree, every breath. Most Jedi struggle to focus on the living Force, caught instead in visions of the future or abstract codes. Yoda's teachings, however, always emphasized presence. He urged Jedi to stay mindful of the moment, to feel the life around them. His species' natural tie to the living Force gave him this insight. He did not simply learn it. It was part of his being. Consider Grogu. Even as a child, he displayed strong abilities without formal training. He healed wounds, calmed creatures, and protected others in ways that reflected an instinctive use of the living Force. Healing through the Force was rare among Jedi. But for Grogu it came naturally. This power reveals how his species draws from the life energy that surrounds them. They are not only sensitive to it, they embody it. Their long lifespans also hint at this bond. Living for centuries suggests that the Force itself sustains them, extending their existence so they may serve as anchors of balance across eras. The secrecy around their origins may also connect to this truth. If their species is bound to the living Force, then their numbers must remain small. Too many of them at once might disrupt balance, tilting the galaxy toward one side. This could explain why so few are ever seen and why their homeworld remains unknown. They emerge only when the galaxy most needs them, drawn forward by the Force's will. Yoda's appearance at the fall of the Republic, Yaddle's quiet role on the Council, and Grogu's survival during the rise of the Empire all align with moments of great imbalance. Their presence is less about chance and more about necessity. Even the way Yoda spoke revealed his bond with the living Force. He often reminded others to let go of fear and to listen. His teaching style differed from other Jedi masters, who focused on doctrine. Yoda leaned into instinct, guiding students to feel the Force for themselves rather than reciting rules. This approach reflected the wisdom of a being who did not need archives to understand truth. He carried the living Force within him, and his species' nature made him its clearest teacher. The galaxy may never learn the full story of Yoda's people. What is certain is that their existence is tied not to power or conquest, but to the living current of the Force itself. They are its rarest expression, vessels chosen to walk the line between mystery and necessity. Their strength is not in what they conquer, but in how they embody the very energy that gives the galaxy life. Rey and Kylo Ren shared a bond that defied the limits of distance and time. It was not simple connection or accident, but something woven into the will of the Force. Through this link, they touched each other's minds, fought across space, and even shared moments of intimacy and understanding. To some, this bond seemed new, yet when examined closely, it echoed something ancient. Their bond mirrored the first great split between Jedi and Sith, a fracture born when the earliest Force users divided themselves between light and dark. Rey and Kylo were not just two individuals, they were the living reflection of a struggle that began thousands of years earlier. The earliest Force users did not see the Force as divided. They studied it in its totality, embracing both passion and restraint, creation and destruction. But with time, disagreement grew. Some argued that to live fully, one must embrace emotion, using it to draw strength. Others insisted that emotion led to corruption, and that only strict control could preserve harmony. What began as debate hardened into division. And from this, the Jedi and Sith were born, light and dark separated, and the galaxy carried the consequences of that rift through centuries of war. Rey and Kylo carried this history within them. Rey stood in the light, but not as the Jedi once did. She was compassionate, open, and instinctive. She did not cling to the rigidity of the old Jedi code. Her strength came from her ability to connect, to reach across divides, and draw others back from darkness. Kylo stood in the dark, but not as a typical Sith. He was consumed by anger, yet beneath it remained conflict and longing. He craved belonging, identity, and purpose. He was no mindless devotee of the dark side, but a man torn between his legacy and his own desires. Together, their bond was not a mistake. It was the Force reminding the galaxy of what had been lost when the first schism occurred. Their connection showed that light and dark are not truly separate. When they fought, they pushed each other to limits neither could reach alone. When they reached for each other, they shared balance, however brief. In their dyad, the Force revealed what the original order had forgotten. Their bond reflected what might have been if the ancient Jedi had not fractured into two warring paths. Consider their final battles on Starkiller Base, on Snoke's ship, and later against Palpatine. Their strength often grew when they stood opposed, yet tied together. Rey could sense the conflict in Kylo, while Kylo could feel the light in Rey. Their link did not erase their differences, it highlighted them. But it also showed that difference did not mean separation. Just as the first Jedi and Sith once embodied two halves of one philosophy, Rey and Kylo embodied two halves of one destiny. The Force placed them together not only to fight, but to remind the galaxy of a truth older than either order. Light and dark are not enemies by nature. They are parts of the same whole. Rey and Kylo's bond was the echo of the first fracture, a chance to heal what had been broken. Whether in conflict or in unity, they carried within them the memory of that ancient split, living proof that the Force still seeks balance through those who embody both sides of its nature. Palpatine was a master of deception, but his greatest power lay not in politics or armies. It was his ability to bend the Force itself toward his will. His rise to Emperor was not only about cunning or control of the Senate, it was the product of a long plan rooted in manipulation at the deepest level of life. Palpatine understood that midichlorians were the bridge between living beings and the Force, and he sought to twist them across generations. Through this control, he ensured the survival of his line of influence and shaped the galaxy long after his own death. Midichlorians existed in every living being, acting as the channel through which the Force spoke and moved. Jedi studied them as a way to understand sensitivity to the Force, while Sith looked for ways to exploit them. Legends spoke of Darth Plagueis, Palpatine's master, who tried to use the dark side to influence midichlorians and create life. Palpatine learned from these teachings, but pushed them further. He mastered the art, not just of creating but of corrupting, bending life itself toward his schemes. This power placed him above ordinary Sith, who sought only domination of others. He sought to dominate the Force through its smallest vessel. The clearest sign of this came with Anakin Skywalker. Shmi Skywalker claimed she bore him without a father, suggesting he was conceived directly by the Force. Many Jedi believed this meant he was the chosen one. Yet there are strong hints that his creation was no pure act of balance, but the result of Sith interference. Palpatine spoke to Anakin of powers his master once had, the ability to create life through manipulation of midichlorians. This was no idle tale, it was a veiled confession. Palpatine was suggesting that Anakin himself might have been born not of chance, but of design. A living product of Sith experiments. Palpatine did not stop with Anakin. His reach extended beyond one generation. The experiments that produced Snoke, and later Rey's father, were continuations of his will. Even after his death at Endor, his spirit clung to remnants of the dark side, guiding cloning projects and unnatural creations. Snoke was one of many failed vessels shaped to channel Palpatine's power. Rey's father, a Strand, cast clone, revealed that Palpatine's manipulation of midichlorians extended to shaping his own bloodline, crafting descendants to serve as tools. His success in Rey proved that he had mastered not only the art of influence, but the bending of life across decades. These actions explain why Palpatine seemed unshakable. He did not simply rely on apprentices or armies. He laid roots within the fabric of life itself, ensuring that his influence could not be undone with his physical death. His control of midichlorians was the foundation for his return and his persistence. While the Jedi saw life as a gift of the Force, Palpatine saw it as clay to be molded, shaped to his vision. In this way, he turned generations into instruments of his will, leaving scars on the galaxy that reached beyond his own reign. The prophecy of the Chosen One was always spoken of as if it pointed to a single figure. The Jedi believed Anakin Skywalker was that figure created by the Force to bring balance. His story seemed to fulfill the vision. He destroyed the Jedi, served the Sith, and then turned against Palpatine in the end, saving his son and casting down the Emperor. To many, that act closed the prophecy. But the truth of the Force is not so simple. The prophecy of the Chosen One was never about one person alone. It is a cycle repeating across generations, shaping the galaxy again and again. The Force demands balance, and balance is never permanent. When one side gains too much strength, the Force responds by raising up someone who can correct it. Anakin was one expression of this cycle, but he was not the beginning and he was not the end. Long before him there were figures who shifted the scales. Tara Vizsla, the Mandalorian Jedi, created the Darksaber and united his people, a sign that the Force had chosen him to guide a turning point. Later, Revan moved between light and dark, embodying the tension of the prophecy in another age. These moments were not accidents. They were part of the same rhythm the Force uses to restore balance. Anakin's life made the pattern visible, but it also showed its cost. He was shaped by both extremes, trained as a Jedi, yet consumed by the Sith. His choices brought destruction and suffering, but his final act restored the light. That restoration was real, but it was not permanent. After his death, darkness rose again in the form of the First Order and Palpatine's return. If Anakin had truly ended the prophecy, such a rise would not have been possible. Instead, the Force responded again, raising Rey as a new expression of the same truth. Rey was not born into power by bloodline. She was chosen, placed into the galaxy at the moment she was needed. Her connection to Kylo Ren reflected the balance itself, light bound to dark in a way neither could break. Just as Anakin's story showed the cycle of fall and redemption, Rey's story showed the cycle of renewal. The Force spoke through her, just as it once spoke through Anakin, shaping the galaxy's future when imbalance threatened to consume it again. This endless cycle explains why the prophecy was so often misunderstood. The Jedi thought of it in rigid terms, expecting a single savior who would deliver a lasting peace. The Sith twisted it into a promise of absolute power. Both failed to see that the prophecy describes the Force's constant movement, not a final resolution. The Chosen One is never just one person, but whoever the Force raises in the moment of greatest need. Imagine the future beyond Rey, if the galaxy again tilts too far into shadow or light. Another figure will rise, chosen not by lineage or title, but by the Force itself. The prophecy will echo once more, because it was never about an ending. It was always about the living balance that must be maintained.